Hi, this is Tracy Slatton of Parvati Press, and I'm here speaking with Sabin Howard, my husband, about the drawing book that he's working on. And we've already had one conversation about it. I'm calling these talks Dialogues about the Drawing Book, and this is number 2. So, hi Sabin.
Hi, Tracy.
Last time we talked about art and drawing and the conceptual and the perceptual as two different strands or elements that create art. But I guess I really should just go back to the beginning and ask, what type of art are we actually talking about, and how did you get to this type of art?
I got to this type of art because of my upbringing from birth on and the influences that I had that were modern and traditional.
So we're talking about a kind of art that's both modern and traditional.
Yes, timeless art. That's what we're talking about. An art that is timeless, that it's not dated, that follows a rich tradition of our past heritage as human beings.
But what makes it timeless?
Timeless for two reasons. It's understood universally, and it's an individual art of an artist's own personal experience.
And how did you find timeless art?
I was born in New York because my father's American and my mother's Italian. So this was in the 60s. And at that point, we were in the Vietnam War, and my parents were very anti-war. So I attended a lot of these anti-war marches, and that taught me at a very early age that you could think outside the box. You could go against what was the accepted norm, and you could choose what you wanted to do with your own life. This anti-war sentiment is something that has stayed with me 50 years later, and it's a matter of not following the herd and not saying, oh yeah, that's okay because that's what our country's doing. So why am I bringing this up? Because in some way or other, this had a huge impact on me as I got into art 19 years later, and I saw art really as something that I was going to do in my own way and not follow the trends. I was bucking what was going on around me. Nobody was doing figurative art at that point. But I want to go back to one last aspect here. If I take this modern aspect of America in the 60s, and then I take this other element that my mother was from Torino, northern Italy, and you put those two elements together. I traveled back to Italy at 3 months old, and I grew up there till I was 3. So my first visual impression of how a city was put together was extremely classical in design. So this had a huge impact visually on how my brain perceived good energy, let's say. And coming back to the United States, there's more of just a lack of human scale in a place like New York City. So you have these two elements. That's really what made me an artist today.
And how did you start drawing?
I started drawing when I was 19. My parents were both PhDs. And so I received a good education, and I didn't take any art classes per se. I did cabinet making in high school, which dealt with the construction of something in a three-dimensional format, and also how do you plan something out? How do you execute something and bring it to fruition? I went to college. I dropped out after a year, and I found myself in Philadelphia working at a antique cabinet restoration shop. And after 6 weeks, I was laid off. This was during the Jimmy Carter era. And I looked through the phone book, the Yellow Pages, and I got a job in South Philadelphia, which was an Italian community similar to Bensonhurst in New York City. And I started Monday morning at a very low rate. I think it was $2.40 an hour. And after 4 days of sweeping up the floor and putting wood into a big 50-gallon oil drum to keep the room warm, and sanding the cabinetry down through the grades, going, from fine to medium, fine, ultra fine. I was doing this all day. By Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, I just was hit by lightning at that moment. And I realized that I was not using my brain, was not fulfilling my potential as a human being. So I walked over to my boss and I said to him, this is just not working out for me and I'm going to quit. And he goes, you can't quit. I'm not going to pay you. He said, you're my apprentice. I'm training you. I said, well, it's just not working out. So keep your $44. And I walked out and I went to a payphone and I called my dad. And I said to my dad, I'm going to go to art school. And he goes, how long is this going to last? And then he hung up. The next phone call I made was to the Philadelphia College of Art. And I knew there was an art school in Philadelphia because I'd walked by this Doric column building on Broad Street. I asked for admissions, passed on to the admissions department, and this woman came on the line. And I asked her, I'd like to go to art school. What do I need to do? And she said, well, you need a portfolio. And I said, what is a portfolio? And she kind of laughed and said, it's 4 o'clock. Why don't you come in? I don't have anything going on, and we can discuss this. So I walked over there in 5 minutes, and I walked back to her office, and she sat with me for over an hour and talked to me. She asked me a few questions, and I said, look, I don't have any experiences in drawing. I've never drawn before in my life, but I have seen the type of art that I want to do. And I was referring to the Medici tomb in Florence, Michelangelo's vision of the Medici, and the architecture that those figures sat in. And it was a visceral experience when I saw it at 14, and that's the type of art I wanted to do. It had craft, and it really elevated me. It made me, just changed me. She proceeded to tell me about a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And after an hour, I left. I went to Joseph Fox bookstore, picked up the book, and that night, around 6 o'clock, I started drawing. And it was excruciatingly hard. I'd never done it before, but I was amazed because as soon as I started to look in a different way, I realized that this was something I could do for a long, long time in my life. It was just phenomenal. That moment is very important to me because not only did it put me on the right course for what I should be doing in my life, but it's also taught me a lot about how, as a human being, you have to be an individual and do what your passion is. You follow your passion. Yet, at the same time, you have to be understood on a universal level by your community or your society. And those are two things that great art has always done. It's the individual's unique vision. And that unique vision it has to have a universal understanding. And that moment, that day, changed my life. It set my course for what I should be doing.
Well, I always think how kind that she sat with you and explained things and gave you recommendations. But it also seems like you're talking about something that's both perceptual and conceptual, going back to our first dialogue. And the conceptual part is this part about being understood, universally understood. And the perceptual part is the way you start to look at things.
Yeah, it's when I picked up the pencil, I had no idea of conceptual. I was just looking at how my brain could shift from a left brain way of looking at the world, which was more about lists, and going into a way of seeing it visually. I'd never done that before. So that was the first step, and that's something that at that moment was extremely hard to shift from one state of mind to a different state of mind. My brain was not set up at that moment. I had not practiced.
So you're talking about practicing perceiving.
Yeah, it's a practice. It's a lifetime practice. And that's what this book is about. It's about one man's idea of what a lifetime practice is in the studio.
Well, this is fascinating, and we will continue our discussion in dialogue number 3. So thank you for talking with me about this.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Till next time, this is Tracy Slatton of Parvati Press. Take care.